Welcome to Madison City Channel's Know Your Candidates interviews, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Dane County. I'm your interviewer, Maria Spinozzi, and I would like to introduce Diane Farsetta, running for Alder from District 12. As we begin, please tell our viewers a bit about how your educational, vocational, and civic experience has prepared you for the position and why you decided to run for Alder.
Well, what I offer the voters of District 12 in the city is decades of neighborhood and grassroots activism, policy experience, and a track record of getting things done at a time of growth and change for our district and for the city as a whole, which is a big reason why I decided to run for office at this time. I think what we need more than anything is an engaged, effective, and responsive Alder who will make sure that diverse voices are heard before decisions are made. My community experience includes serving as a board member of the Emerson East Neighborhood Association since moving to that part of the city in 2007, and I've been involved in planning, public art, and park revitalization efforts in that role. I've also worked to build international solidarity between Madison and our 9 sister cities as a co-founder of one of those relationships and as a member and former vice chair of the city committee on sister cities. I've also volunteered a lot with people on the margins, for example, the formerly homeless residents of the Occupy Madison Tiny Homes Village, and mentored an at-risk child. And what I've learned from that is the power, really, of expanding what we mean by community, as well as the importance of trauma-informed practices. I have health and environmental policy experience as the former fellow with the Wisconsin Women's Policy Institute, as a steering committee member of the Wisconsin Family and Caregiver Support Alliance, and as the former executive director of the Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice. And professionally, I'm a biologist and a communicator who works at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing, building partnerships to support older adult health. I'm also a union member and a homeowner. I live in workforce housing that was built for factory workers 100 years ago for the Oscar Mayer and resulting factories in the area.
Madison's efforts to address chronic homelessness have appeared to fall short, especially with regard to providing sufficient support systems for a housing-first approach. What ideas do you have that might create greater success for projects such as the one on Tree Lane?
Mm-hmm. Right, well, this is an incredibly important question and gets back to the importance of the trauma-informed approach to working with people who are at the margins of our society. It's very unfortunate that our first 2 examples of working with housing first developments here in Madison were off to a rocky start. Housing First is not a new model. It's been around for decades. The federal government is requiring it for some funding sources. And I firmly believe that housing is a human right. We simply can't expect people to be functioning members of our community without having housing. Studies have also shown that it costs less to move people into housing. The important part is having those wraparound services and knowing the system and having the relationships with the local service providers. And that's where the first 2 examples of Housing First, including Tree Lane, got off to a rocky start. And so making sure on the city's behalf that there are very strong services from the beginning, knowing that there is an adjustment period for people who are moving in to these types of projects, and also perhaps doing a phased move-in of residents so that there is time for them to adjust and for us to adjust services. And then lastly, making sure that we're connecting and supporting people not just within these buildings, but with the broader community, I think is also really important.
The Madison Police Department has been faulted for not having appropriate policies and training around de-escalation and use of force, especially with regard to people of color. What is your perspective on whether any changes are needed in ways Madison police operate in our community?
Right. Well, again, this is an incredibly important issue that there has been a lot of debate and discussion and study of. I very much appreciate the work that has been done by community members, by the police policy ad hoc committee that's reviewing the OIR report, the consultant report that came up with 146 recommendations, the police department also weighing in. it's very important that everyone feels safe and that police officers also have a path to maintain their excellence and to feel supported in a very important role. So I do believe that de-escalation, as was pointed out in the OIR report, that is something that there could be more emphasis on and ongoing training around also mental health crises. And I think it is also very important, the linchpin recommendation of the OIR report is having that independent auditor's office and a civilian review board, as well as making the data available on police officer activities and the demographics of different police activities in terms of how they affect our residents. Because again, everyone needs to feel safe. And the other thing that I would say is targeting the police resources that we have and asking, are there ways that we could address, for example, nonviolent mental health crises through purely civilian task force, as is done in other communities.
There is a perception that Madison's story is a tale of two cities, one in which people of color are less likely to experience success. What can be done to ensure that Madison is a community in which all people can thrive?
Right. Well, I think taking the equity lens to whatever we're working on, the racial equity and social justice tool is a wonderful development that the city is using, including on important things in our area, like the public market and the Oscar Mayer redevelopment project. And so I believe continuing that and also looking at some of the things that I'm highlighting in the campaign, the need for quality, affordable housing, for adding transportation alternatives, for looking at the community health and safety. These are all things that have an equity lens, as well as strengthening our neighborhoods and our communities overall. So having that data in terms of, for example, bus trips, if you look at the race of the person who is riding Madison Metro, the rides are 40% longer for African American people who are riding the bus versus white people. And that is largely due to how our community is segregated and how opportunities are segregated. I do think that the Market Ready program, to get to the economic development side of things, is a really good model, and that has done a lot to bring local innovators into what will be our new public market on our side of town.
What issue have you identified as being of primary concern to the residents of your district, and how would you approach tackling it?
Right. So I would say what I hear a lot from people as I go around the district is a lot of interest and questions about how do we develop and redevelop and grow in ways that are expanding opportunity and strengthening our neighborhoods. So there is both excitement and some concern about having that hole that Oscar Mayer filled in terms of the workforce and in terms of just that opportunity of having a very well-placed area for connection and transportation, for workforce development, for welcoming the communities in and revitalizing that area. But I think there are also other areas. We talked about the public market, looking at the Northgate and Northport shopping centers, where we can, with city guidance, make sure that this development happens in ways that support local businesses and add amenities without pricing people out of our area.
The relationship between the council and the mayor appears at times contentious. Is this a problem, and if so, how would you improve the relationship?
Well, it's funny to talk about that, because I think that the relationship, right, is based on serving the people, right, of our city and making sure we're representing them. I don't think that there's a problem with disagreeing, but I do think we need to look at power relationships. I appreciate the work of the Task Force on Government Structure that's ongoing, and that's looking at how can we facilitate resident input into city decisions. I think the budget process is an incredibly important one, where we could really improve how we're engaging members of the public and having more meaningful opportunities for people to weigh in on that. And so the sometimes contentious or seemingly contentious debates, the tone is less of concern to me than the substance. And as long as we're having a good process, we can agree to disagree. In fact, having disagreements allows us publicly to really weigh out what are the benefits, the pros and cons of different options.
What changes, if any, should be made in how the city approaches major projects such as the Judge Doyle Square and Public Market?
Right. So those are two larger developments that were in the news recently for changes, but I think for very different reasons. So the Judge Doyle Square, there were unfortunate breakdowns in communications with the original developer. I do appreciate the council. I think that the current council was very strong in negotiating with the developer and finally getting to a point where, while yes, there was one more payment that was given to the developer, it actually wound up saving the city money and accelerating the timeline of development in that area while preserving our parking utilities, strengthening our parking options downtown, which is incredibly important. With Public Market, I would say that the change was overwhelmingly good because what we had was looking at one location that was closer to the East Washington side, East Washington and First, and then changing that to the current Fleet Services building that's more on the Johnson side of the property. And I think that was a great opportunity at just the right time. We hadn't committed to the alternate site, and I think that there were great benefits of moving in terms of having a larger space and also an existing building, right? So the cost will be less, and also the environmental footprint is lower because we're using existing infrastructure.
What council committees do you want to serve on and why?
Right. So there are many important ones to our area in particular. Given what I've talked about, it won't be surprising to hear the Economic Development Committee is, I think, very important to me as we're looking at Oscar Mayer redevelopment, public market, and equity issues around economic opportunity in the city as a whole. The Public Market Development Committee, when the new Strategic Area Plan Committee for Oscar Mayer is brought up. The Housing Strategy Committee in terms of making sure that we're expanding affordable housing, growing the city's affordable housing fund, and using that also to rehabilitate our existing affordable housing stock. The Committee on Aging, in terms of my professional experience working with older adult health issues, I think would be very important. So there are many options that I am looking forward to.
What would you like to say to the viewing audience as we complete this interview?
Sure. Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts. And at a time, again, when our district and our city is facing growth and changes, I appreciate that. District 12 had the largest primary of any on the council. I think we had really good discussions. I appreciate the role of civic groups, of our neighbors, and of the candidates. And this is what local government should do. It should facilitate these public discussions. And if people want to learn more about me, they can go to dianefor12.org to learn more.
Okay. I want to thank Diane Farsetta for speaking with us and the viewing audience for taking the time to know your candidates. Please vote in this and every election. On behalf of Madison City Channel and the League of Women Voters of Dane County, I thank you for joining us.